Could you name a country in the heart of Africa that's so high up, its weather is perfect, even though it's practically sitting on the equator? Now, what if I told you that same beautiful, ancient kingdom was once united, only to be tragically divided by a fake idea of superiority brought in by outsiders? Well, this tiny, resilient nation is called Burundi, and today we're unpacking everything to know about it. So keep watching. Unlike a lot of its sub-Saharan neighbours, whose borders were basically drawn with a ruler by European powers, Burundi's shape actually reflects a state that evolved on its own. A monarchy. But before we get into all of that, let's rewind the clock a bit. The earliest known residents were the Twa people, a pygmy hunter-gatherer population. But around the year 1000 CE, things started to change with the arrival of the Hutu farmers, who, side note, make up the largest proportion of the population today. Sometime after the Hutu, the Tutsi arrived, and by the 16th century, a Tutsi monarchy had fully developed, founded by Ntare Rushatsi, or Ntare I. From there, the Kingdom of Burundi, or Urundi, expanded over the centuries. So now we know that there are different groups in this country, and the king was Tutsi. But identifying as Hutu or Tutsi wasn't just about birth, but was actually pretty fluid. Sure, there are distinctive physical differences, like the Tutsi were often presumed to be taller and lighter-skinned, and the Hutu shorter and darker-skinned, but people intermarried, and they all spoke the same language, Rundi. So really the biggest separator was tradition, and, well, wealth. The Tutsi were traditionally cattle owners, while the Hutu were farmers. But a rich Hutu could essentially be identified as a Tutsi, and a poor Tutsi could be identified as a Hutu. In short, it was really a societal structure based partially on what you did and how much you had. Fast forward to the second half of the 19th century, and this is when the colonizers arrived. But due to its challenging terrain, European explorers and slave traders didn't exactly rush in. In 1858, English explorers Richard Burton and John Hanning Speke were the first Europeans generally credited with visiting Burundi as they explored Lake Tanganyika. Then, in 1890, Burundi, along with Rwanda and Tanganyika, became part of the German Protectorate of German East Africa. Although it didn't last very long because after World War I, Germany lost its colonies, and in 1922, Burundi and Rwanda were handed over to Belgium as the Mandate of Rwanda-Urundi. This is where the story takes a turn. Because what did the Belgian administrators do? They basically took those ethnic labels, Hutu and Tutsi, and they turned them into weapons. They used their own biases and decided the Tutsi minority was superior primarily because of their appearance, which meant the Tutsi got all the good jobs in local government. But before this, a Hutu could sometimes become Tutsi just by gaining a lot of wealth or cattle, and suddenly that door was slammed shut. Power became concentrated in the hands of the Tutsi minority, and that set the stage for deep divisions. After World War II, Burundians had had enough of foreign rule, and they wanted their own independence. And during the 1961 elections, a party called UPRONA, which had both Hutu and Tutsi members, won. Their leader, Prince Rwagasore, a Tutsi who was a huge voice for unity, became Prime Minister. But then, tragically, on October 13, 1961, Rwagasore was assassinated. The country wasn't even officially independent yet, and this huge loss plunged them straight into a crisis. Still, they pushed through, and Burundi officially gained its independence on July 1st, 1962. But things were anything but peaceful in those first years, especially in 1965. In that same year, parliamentary elections gave the Hutu a majority, but the king just ignored the results and picked a Tutsi as prime minister instead. So, in October of that same year, some Hutu officers attempted a coup, which led to brutal counterattacks by the Tutsi-dominated army. The result? Up to 5,000 people were killed. Then, just a year later in November 1966, a guy named Michel Micombero staged another coup, got rid of the monarchy completely, and named himself president. And just like that, the final hurdle for complete Tutsi power was gone. Now hold on, because the story's not over yet. In April and May of 1972, after a Hutu-led uprising, the Tutsi-dominated government decided to strike back with genocidal killings against the Hutu community. This even caused trouble within the Tutsi community, leading to Micombero's overthrow in 1976. That brought in the Second Republic under President Jean-Baptiste Bagaza. Then, in September 1987, Major Pierre Buyoya staged another coup and proclaimed the Third Republic. Buyoya seemed to signal a shift toward progress by releasing political prisoners. But the huge gap between the Hutus' hope for change and the reality of continued Tutsi control sparked massive violence again in August 1988, where over 20,000 people were killed. And you guessed it, the majority of them were Hutu. But what's surprising is how Buyoya responded. He publicly said, "Yes, we have a Hutu-Tutsi problem," and he even put together a cabinet with a Hutu majority. This progressive push led to Burundi's first free democratic election in June 1993, and Melchior Ndadaye, a Hutu, was elected president. But just 3 months later, on October 21st, 1993, President Ndadaye was assassinated during a military coup. The wave of violence that followed sent Burundi spiralling into a full-blown civil war that would drag on for over a decade, claiming an estimated 300,000 lives in total. The fighting intensified, and in July 1996, the Tutsi-led army staged yet another coup, reinstating ex-President Pierre Buyoya. Honestly, it's like a never-ending seesaw of power switches. But thanks to peace talks mediated by powerful figures like Nelson Mandela, the Arusha Agreement was signed in 2000. It called for a power-sharing interim government, which eventually led to a new power-sharing constitution in 2005. Finally, a Hutu, Pierre Nkurunziza, was elected president. The last remaining rebel group signed a peace agreement in 2006, and for a little while, hope was really strong. Unfortunately, stability is a slippery thing. And in 2015, President Nkurunziza's decision to run for a controversial third term sparked prolonged unrest and fighting, and over 400,000 refugees fled. Finally, in 2020, following the unexpected death of President Nkurunziza, former Hutu rebel leader Evariste Ndayishimiye took office as president. And that brings us right up to the present day. So, we've covered the history, and now it's time to put Burundi on the map. Literally. It's a small landlocked nation that's often called the heart of Africa for its location and shape. It sits right in East Africa, sharing borders with Rwanda to the north, Tanzania to the east and south, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the west. When you look at its size, Burundi is compact. The total area is 27,830 square kilometres, or about 10,747 square miles. Okay, so the topography of Burundi is dominated by mountains and plateaus, which divide the country into 3 major natural regions. Running along the western border is the Rift Valley region, known locally as the Imbo. East of the Imbo, the land rises sharply into the central mountain region, which is a series of north-south ridges, forming the Zaire-Nile watershed divide. These hills are intensely cultivated and picturesque, with the highest point being Mount Heha at about 2,700 metres, or over 8,800 feet. And further east, the land slopes more gently toward the Tanzanian border, forming the central and eastern plateau region called the Kumoso. But here's a cool fact. Even though Burundi is close to the equator, it never gets uncomfortably hot. Want to know why? It's all thanks to the country's high elevation. That altitude keeps the climate moderate and pretty pleasant, which basically means it has a chill, moderate tropical climate. Temperatures across the country only average between 19 degrees Celsius, or 66 degrees Fahrenheit, and 25 degrees Celsius, or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, rain is a different story because it's a bit patchy. The high plateaus get soaked. But if you're down in those lower regions, you'll get less rain a year. As for the seasons, it's not simply wet or dry. They actually have 2 dry seasons, a long one that runs from June to August, and a shorter, little one in January and February. Naturally, that means they also have 2 wet seasons packed in there. So yeah, that's a pretty unusual landscape. Now remember that I said Burundi is a small, landlocked country. Well, inside that nation there are about 14.4 million people, making it super dense, with roughly 442 people per square kilometre, or about 1,145 people per square mile. Now, when it comes to power, the CNDD-FDD, or the National Council for the Defence of Democracy Forces for the Defence of Democracy, has been the big ruling party since those post-Civil War elections back in 2005. And needless to say, they've got a tight grip. After the 2025 election, they pretty much own the legislature, snagging 100 out of 103 seats in the Assembly and 10 out of 13 seats in the Senate. Also, President Evariste Ndayishimiye still holds the seat until the next presidential election in 2027. But despite the current political climate, the government is trying to look ahead, setting a huge goal: emerging country by 2040 and a developed country by 2060. Because at the end of the day, all they want is to transform the economy for strong, long-lasting growth. But the reality right now is this: Burundi is a low-income country, and 85% of its people work in agriculture. The economy struggles because of things like widespread corruption and messy rules. And naturally, these issues slow down growth and make it hard to get the external aid they really need. But on the bright side, there is momentum. Real GDP growth is picking up, jumping to 3.9% in 2024 from 2.7% in 2023. Not only that, but things are projected to keep looking up, hitting 4.6% in 2024-2025, thanks to coffee and gold exports. So if things go exactly as planned, over the next few years, growth is expected to average 5%. But this progress is like pushing a car uphill. Because the truth is, the economy has big problems with finances and money supply, which is why they're working on a reform plan with the IMF. And currently, a huge headache they're dealing with is inflation. It averaged 20.2% in 2024, but it's expected to nearly double to a scary 39.1% in 2025 before it calms down. This constant instability means getting people out of poverty is painfully slow. And did you know poverty affects 74.8% of the population? But okay, let's look at the bigger picture now. Officially, the 2024 GDP is only reported as $2.16 billion by the World Bank, and experts say that number is way too low. And here's why. It ignores the 35% informal economy and uses really old data. So when you fix those errors, the actual economic size is much higher. World Economics estimates Burundi's 2025 GDP at $22 billion, which is 81% higher than the official records. So, while the political and money struggles are totally real, that huge potential is sitting there, just waiting for those reforms to really take hold. And right now, all we can really do is wait and get to know the people and their culture a little better. Which brings us here. Now, even though Burundi has faced some really rough times, it's still absolutely packed with rich culture. Sadly, all that chaos and ethnic conflict made simply surviving the main focus for so long. It weakened the concept of family and village councils. Sure, the government tries to get everyone together by celebrating shared culture, but it's been tough. Still, the heart of that heritage is definitely alive in the arts and everyday life. If you know anything about Burundi, you probably know the music and dance. They are world famous for a reason. Their most amazing cultural export has to be Les Maîtres-Tambours du Burundi, or the Drummers of Burundi. This troupe is made up of to 30 percussionists and dancers, and they make this incredibly powerful, energetic, layered sound using different types of drums. The primary Nkiranya drum, the continuous beat of the Amashiko drum, and the complementary rhythm of the Ibishikizo drum. You'll also hear the traditional Karienda. This is the sacred drum that was once a royal symbol. And don't forget the Ntour dancers either. They celebrate national folklore and have even won tons of international folk dance competitions. Plus, keep an ear out for Burundian singer Kaja Nin, who's recorded in Swahili, Rundi, and French. Now, with this in mind, I'm curious. What's your favourite type of African music? Have you listened to any African artists lately? If so, drop your favourite song or recommendation in the comments below. But going back, it's not just about music here. Burundian creativity shines in their arts and crafts, which make fantastic gifts if you ever visit. Basket weaving is popular, and you'll see beautiful beadwork all around. Besides those, people also love these decorated papyrus panels, which feature geometric patterns and scenes from old Burundian legends. For something more exotic, you can find cool masks, shields, statues, and pottery in Burundi to bring home. And speaking of pottery, here's a neat little fun fact. That tradition was actually started by Italian missionaries back in the 1960s, but Burundian potters quickly added their own unique indigenous touches. Now, when it comes to sports, football is the biggest thing going, but you might be surprised to know Burundians are truly incredible at track and field. In fact, Burundian runner Venuste Nyongabo won the nation's very first, and still only, Olympic medal, taking the gold in the 5,000-metre race at the 1996 Atlanta Games. So look, despite all the challenges the country has faced, Burundian culture remains profoundly rich, resilient, and deeply expressive. It really is a true heart of Africa. And speaking of incredible stories, if you loved this video, you'll enjoy this next one.